talk a little bit about FCS payouts and quarterbacks. So let's start with the vegetables here. The vegetables are just what is going to happen with FCS teams if they don't get to play, like we don't expect many to play, their Power 5 opponent where they get payouts that are enormous. So for perspective here, Oklahoma pays some of the most money to any FCS team to play this year, with Missouri State receiving $650,000 to come down to Norman and take a whooping. And now they are footing the bill for a testing protocol to make sure that that game happens. But also in there are places like East Tennessee State, who gets $550,000 for its game against Georgia. Georgia, for instance, hauls in around $10 million for every home game. So that's $60 million. Then when you're talking about gate revenue and concessions. Now, the $550,000 that East Tennessee State's going to take from that game is about 20% of their budget. Okay? They need that money just to operate. They love pay-for-play games. Meanwhile, Arkansas State was going to make $1.8 million for its game against Michigan State. And now that game is off because the Big Ten has gone to a conference-only model, as we learned a couple weeks ago. And as I continue to look down the list of FCS opponents that are going to either make some money or lose some money, I wonder what's going to happen to the future of college football, because we're talking about 63 scholarships for FCS teams versus 85 scholarships for FBS teams. And at the FCS level, football is even more of a luxury for many of these programs than it is even at places like the University of Tulsa or Arkansas State or Houston, where the alumni is thicker and the money rolling in is a little bit more. So knowing that, and also knowing that we're likely to see the fewest amount of football games that we've seen in the past 50 years, probably prior to World War II, I was thinking about what is the silver lining in all of this. And the silver lining in all of this for me is I'm going to watch teams that I probably don't get an opportunity to watch as much. And as a listener of this show, you know I love college football. I love it in all its forms. I'm the guy watching Akron and Eastern Michigan play each other on a Tuesday night. That is me, right? I am the guy that, yes, of course I get up for OU Texas. Of course I get up for Ohio State Michigan. I also will get up for North Dakota State versus James Madison in Dallas, where it's freezing, to try to get that game in before I got to watch something else like, say, Memphis, Penn State, and the Cotton Bowl. So knowing that, I'm going to pay special attention to a McNeese State if they get to play. And I think they will, like most schools in Louisiana. I'm also going to pay special attention to Texas high school football this year in a way that I probably don't get to pay that much attention, right? Between Oklahoma and Texas, we're going to get high school football off the ground. It's about how much of it we're going to get to play. So there's going to be a sense of urgency, especially on my part and the part of evaluators and coaches who want to see players live in August and September to try to get to as many as possible. It's also proving to us a number of things, like it's a farce that these games are scheduled 10 years in advance. Because mostly what you're doing is you're scheduling season tickets, right? You're scheduling, hey, look, if you want to be around for the ticket list for OU Nebraska in 2021 and 2022, thank God those are still on the menu, then you probably should be a season ticket holder in the 2010s, right? But knowing that BYU and Alabama could basically get something worked out in over a weekend, or that Hawaii and Robert Morris can get something out, work something out in June, like, why are we scheduling these games so far in advance? We're also finding out just how much money there is in college football and how much money there still stands to be made in college football. Because an expanded playoff is going to grow the pie. And while I have made an argument for an expanded playoff, being that I want to see as many teams as possible have an opportunity to play for the belt as possible, it's got a better argument now. And that argument is, remember all that money you lost in 2020? That money you lost from no NCAA tournament, no conference tournaments, big time non-conference games you don't get to play, perhaps a shortened college football season. and no fans in the stands in some places, some fans in the stands in some places, you're going to want that money back. And you don't get to make that money back. This is sunk cost at this point. But you can make more money in 2021 than you have made in the previous, 50 years, 60 years in college football? Because with television, and this question that I put out to the Twitters, what is America's second favorite sport, with the NFL being its favorite sport? Most of the answers that I got back were college football, the NBA, or baseball. There's an argument for baseball still kind of being there, but that's because folks in their 50s, 60s, and 70s are still with us. As the Mayberries and the RJs get older, I'll tell you what I'm not doing. Watching baseball. Tell you what I am doing. Watching college football in the NBA. You watch college football so that you can be prepared for what's going to happen in the NFL as a casual fan. I watch college football because I believe that it's a better sport, but also because the stories are better. Now, because I believe those things doesn't make them better. What makes those things fascinating and fun is I'm more likely to see the matchups that truly get under my skin and make me feel just excited to be a fan to watch this game than I am in the NFL. I don't really get up for Oakland versus Kansas City, right? Even as my mom is a Raiders fan, Mayberry's one of my best friends is a Raiders fan. I just don't do it. And Kansas City won the Super Bowl, and they got the best player in the league. I don't do it. I get up for the idea of Oregon versus North Dakota State, because that is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me to watch the best FCS team of the past 20 years play one of the class football teams of the past 10 years in Oregon, on Oregon's turf, in a game that North Dakota State could have won. Now that game is toast, right? USC Alabama is a blue blood versus a blue blood, is a game that has been linked in history to integration in college football. That game means something to me, because if Sam Bam Cunningham did not run roughshod over Alabama for 4 touchdowns, Barry Bryant doesn't get to look at Mr. Segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, and say, do you want Alabama to keep losing to USC? Then maybe you need to back down off that policy. Which led to Jalen Hurts being the first black quarterback to start a national championship game for Alabama in 2017. Like that's what that means for me. Integration in college football, the idea of rags to riches, of a kid from Kennesaw, Georgia, going to Georgia, being an upback, deciding he's got, you know what? I want to be the starting quarterback. They want me at Ohio State. I'll go over to Ohio State. Run off 2 quarterbacks at Ohio State, and then end his season as a Heisman finalist in Justin Fields, right? To know that a Trevor Lawrence could go to Clemson, which in the NFL is a lot like, Joe Burrow going to Cincinnati. But I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, spoiler, what Joe Burrow is in Louisiana, which is a folk hero, is probably not going to happen with Joe Burrow in Cincinnati, because the league is not set up for that. In college football, we still recruit. In college football, we still say, hey, we're the best. Don't you want to join the best? And the only way to overcome that is to prove to those kids day in and day out that you're a better place for them to be than a place that is competing for championships. Look at what Mac Brown is doing in North Carolina. Look at what Jeremy Pruitt is doing at Tennessee. And then look at what Oregon is doing, what USC is doing. They're competing with Alabama, with Georgia, with Ohio State, with teams that have played 4 national championships and won national championships in some cases in the last 10 years. And yet and still, we get news stories, like the story of Josh Proctor. Proctor is the first kid from Oklahoma that Ohio State went to go get. First ever. And Jordan Fuller is talking about Josh Proctor as being one of the most talented people that you're ever going to meet. And Jordan Fuller was the guy in the defensive backfield that made everything work for Ohio State last year. And Proctor inherits that role of being their single high free safety. He's going to have to keep the lid on the defense. And he is, for many people, the X factor on a very good Ohio State team that could be good enough to win a national championship, he might be it. I'm not going to see that story often enough at the NFL level. I don't hear about undrafted guys being all pros, right? I don't hear about a first time that a dude ends up on an NFL team where they've never selected a guy very often. I mean, that story for me right now is Darius Leonard out of South Carolina State, shows up to Indianapolis and becomes a destroyer of worlds and an all-pro defensive player. Doesn't happen nearly enough for me. Happens every week in college football. The stars sometimes are the guys that you point to. The stars are often guys that we didn't expect to get much out of. Your quote-unquote 2-star, 3-star recruit that makes good. Ed Reed at Miami, right? Thinking about Baker Mayfield and how that can never happen at the NFL level. Baker Mayfield walks on to Texas Tech, gets a starting job, leaves, walks on at Oklahoma, gets a starting job, wins a Heisman Trophy, leads his team to the Rose Bowl. Doesn't really know what it means to lose the Big 12 championship as a starting quarterback. You know, like I love those stories. And the idea of a quarterback showing up to camp without an invitation, who rises up to be the starting quarterback in, September, October, and then leaves, shows up at another NFL training camp, uninvited, and does the same thing and wins an MVP. It's not going to happen, man. Maybe I get to see a little bit more of that this year. Maybe that's what it's going to be about. Maybe this year is going to be for the dogs that everybody claims that they are. Maybe this year is going to be for the quarterback who might get an opportunity because, doggone it, the COVID happened to the starting quarterback. Maybe it's the year that Tanner Schaefer shows everybody what he was actually doing at Canadian all along. As long as we get football, we get the chance to be surprised. That's what these FCS payouts were for me. There was the opportunity to be surprised. Probably wasn't going to happen, but as I learned in Little Giants 20 years ago, all it takes is one time. And one time is enough to get me through college football.